first. So first, Landon, are you actually here or are you at your?
He's at his daughter's tennis match and asked Jason and I to be his backup.
Okay, great, Jan. Do you guys, I think he wanted you guys to talk about your candidate nights, right?
Right, really quick. We were actually inspired, and Jason, jump in if I missed something. We were actually inspired by the West Side, who's doing a candidates forum on September 22nd, and we thought, hey, let's do one on the East Side. So I sent out a little notice, and Landon and Jason jumped in, as did a few others. So we met on Monday and put it together, and all of the candidates except for 3 have RSVP'd. So we're going to have a really great lineup. It's October the 3rd. It's a Monday, and we're saying from 6 to 8. But technically we'll get started at 6:30. We just want everybody, to get there and get in their seats. And there's going to be a pre and post opportunity to mingle with the candidates at tables out in the foyer. So let me just quickly run by the races that we've got on the docket. We've got the Salt Lake County at-large race. We've got the Senate District 13th race, the House District 23rd race, the Salt Lake County Attorney. We've got the Salt Lake Clerk, got the Utah State Board of Education, and the Salt Lake School Board Precinct 6. And like I said, everyone's jumped in. We give them a very short timeline to get back to us. And we've heard from everyone except for 3. So I'm going to chase after those 3 today. I think Jason is too. And Landon's at his daughter's tennis match. So he's absolutely no help to us, but he's a good guy and we're glad to have him. Jason, do you want to add anything? Jason's got a little flyer, by the way, that he created. And so it'd be good for you to kind of spread it through your system and just use that as kind of a promo. You want to say something, Jason?
Yeah, sure. This came together very quickly. Thanks, Jan, for your initiative and leadership, and of course the West Side for inspiring us on this side of the city to do something similar. I think we can cover just about all of the districts and all of the races quite well in sort of 2 events, which of course helps the campaigns because they don't have to go to lots of small events. They can do just some big events. And I'll be sending that flyer out. I'm just finalizing it a little bit. That's something that we'll be able to promote the event first as a save the date. And second, once we get the Zoom registration link, be able to start registering folks for the Zoom call, which will hopefully be run by Salt Lake City Public Library, which has been a very great partner in the past in terms of putting that together. So watch for more details coming soon. Obviously, people start focusing on campaigns and races as we get closer to November. And of course, the ballots go out 3 to 4 weeks ahead of time. Mm-hmm. So of course, this election will be happening before we know it in mid-October, really, is when people will be voting. So that's all we got. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah. Judy, what's up?
I just wanted to say that it's going to be at Highland High School, and the League of Women Voters will be there in force, myself leading the team of people who want to register people to vote.
Right.
So that might be a good time to bring your friends that maybe they're new in the neighborhood and they, if you move, you have to re-register. So in your new address. So make sure that everybody is registered.
Yeah, listen, collectively, I think we represent tens of thousands of constituents. They're probably, hopefully, we'll get several hundred out either in person at Highland High or also online. I mean, between the 2 options, we hope there'll be a good turnout. Lots of opportunity to plaster their campaign posters around the school. We've got that permission, and then have the meet and greet before at little tables, and then afterwards people can kind of go up to their candidate and so it's not going to be a debate style. I should explain the format. Candidates are going to get up for 5 minutes. They're going to give their spiel. And if their opponent doesn't show, we're still going to go ahead with it. We've told that to everybody so that, it's fair. If someone can't make it, they can send a surrogate. So that's allowed. And I see hands up. Jasmine, do you want to, I don't know if the hands up are for me or for Jason, or do you want to, Jasmine, do you want to jump in or do you want me to just go ahead, Jason? I'll let Jasmine jump in and figure out who the hands are for.
Yes, sorry everyone. Our internet just went down at the office, so I had to hop on really quickly on my phone. So, what did we already make a switch to Andrew and his team?
No,
No, we're still talking about the other one. I don't know.
Still at nights.
I don't know if
Um,
Amy and Gwen want to talk about the election or not, or something else.
Okay, go ahead. I'm not sure who had their hand raised first. So Gwen, you're unmuted, so we'll start with you.
Okay, I wanted to announce that the Greater Avenues is also having an event separate from this one. Our event is on October 19th. That's a Wednesday evening, and it's going to be at the Memorial House in Memory Grove. And it's put together by the GACC, Capitol Hill, and Fair Park. And we have commitments from Senator Lee and Evan McMillan, but I worry that as we get closer, those would fade. But we do have commitments from them, and then we would go down the ballot. We're just in the process now of inviting people and getting firm commitments on that. And we're going to start at 6 with an hour of just talking to candidates at their tables and so on, and then we'll have a bit of a now, well, I don't know, each candidate will have some time starting at 7. So it's being put together right now, but we've got a little bit of time. So
Great, congratulations. More the merrier. Amy and Dorothy, do you guys have something or?
No, I'm just going to follow up with Judy offline, asking what about the League of Women Voters, what they do in terms of recruitment at the University of Utah. My stepdaughter is very involved in Greek life. Let's pick up some voters to vote early and vote often.
Yeah.
this is Gwen again. I'm sorry that she reminded me. The League of Women Voters is also a participant in our event on the 19th. I forgot. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys. Dorothy, did you have a comment?
I'm just, having been involved with the West Side debate a couple of years ago that we did, plus the one that was being done now and these other ones. I mean, we've been trying to get just the campaigns from Chris Stewart and Mike Lee to show up, not even the candidate, just the campaigns, with no luck at all. And if you're having those same sorts of issues, I can see why Gwen is concerned that these guys might flake out. And maybe people who are smarter than I am can talk about ways to approach them so that they see the value of actually talking to their constituents. That's all I've got to say.
Thanks, Dorothy. Any last comments about candidate nights at all? Okay. Hearing none, let's turn the time over to Andrew and Joseph to talk about the work that they're doing at the mayor's office.
Thanks, Jasmine. It's Andrew Johnston with the Mayor's Office, Director of Homelessness Policy and Outreach. Joseph Ramos is with us as well. He works for the city's homeless engagement team. Many of you know a lot of the details about what they do, but if people report on the mobile app, homeless camps or issues around homelessness, Joseph and his team are literally the people who answer those and catalog them, respond to them, do follow-ups. They had over 6,000 last year, and we expect that will probably increase, partially because there's been a big push to advertise the app as a good source of reporting issues across the city. And also because we have a lot of folks who are still in shelter for the time being. So thanks for inviting us. We did want to talk a little bit about the city's rapid intervention concept. And Joseph will take the bulk of this because he's right in the trenches doing this and coordinating among all the entities involved in this with us. But I wanted to frame this for you all that we've had this, the Salt Lake County Health Department is responsible for health-related issues across the entire county. That includes generally environmental issues around camping, particularly on the river or open space, but just in general about health and human hygiene. In this city, we've traditionally had a mixture of camps, but some larger ones, and that's generally where the abatements with the county health department have happened. We have intentionally tried to keep camps smaller this year, which is for a couple of reasons. One is because from our outreach team perspective, Volunteers of America, Utah, and some other groups are out there, smaller groups of people camping are easier to interact with and are more likely to accept services than the larger ones. It's also less environmentally difficult sometimes with all the other folks that kind of come around larger camps, and they grow exponentially with folks who are not unsheltered. So with that in mind, this rapid intervention concept is something we've looked at nationally about how do you go in and resolve camps with people. And so this involves outreach and cleaning and all those kind of things, but know that the point of this is not just cleaning and moving people. It's about helping resolve camps based on what we've seen nationally into housing resources as we bring them online. And we just had an announcement this week about more housing we hope to have this winter before springtime comes. So wanted to frame this in that context, that it's more about not just about responding to public needs, it's also about getting folks in out of camps into permanent housing. Joseph, and I think Michelle's there as well.
Yes, we're both here. I mean, I don't know how I follow that up, Andrew. You kind of hit the nail on the head. Do we have any questions from the group about the rapid intervention process, what we do here at the HEART team? Let's start by opening it up a little bit, and we can kind of run with it from there.
Perhaps maybe Joseph, Michelle, if you want to talk about the nuts and bolts of if somebody reports on the app, for instance, sort of what that process looks like, and then what people may or may not see sort of immediately at the camps, because this intervention is unique in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take that one. Thanks for having us today. Everyone, we really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you about this. So when you make a report of an active camp on the app, that does come to our team. As Andrew has mentioned, it's a nuanced response mechanism that we have to be able to address camping. I think sometimes when people put things in the app, they think that there is going to be something that those campers are then going to be dispersed really quickly. We are working internally on making sure that we appropriately communicate with everyone who is reporting an active camp, what our plans are with that camp. And we're working through a couple of other things with SLC Mobile too. But when you report an active camp, what that does is it puts it on a list for us. We evaluate that camp. So we try to figure out how many people are staying in the camp, what's the condition of the camp, and is the camp co-located with something that is a service for vulnerable people? Sorry, that was hard for me to say. What we want to make sure of is that we're using this resource to address small camps, but that we're also not really allowing camps to establish near services for people who are vulnerable. So that would be schools, it would be senior centers, it would be homeless resource centers, things like that, where we know that a camp can then block access to that service for that population. We don't want to see that happen. So we take a look at all of the camps that are reported to us. And based on the information that we receive and what we're able to kind of deduce from getting eyes on the camp, we will prioritize it either for a rapid intervention cleanup, which is called the site rehabilitation, or we will refer it over to the Volunteers of America for this enhanced outreach that Andrew, I believe that you talked a bit about. And what that does is it basically triggers kind of like a mini abatement is what it is. We still partner with the county health department on carrying these out. but they don't necessarily have to be on site. What we have seen in the past with the county health department is that they're the health department for the entire county. And so they have to be able to split their time evenly between all cities in the county. And we know in Salt Lake City that we have greater need for that resource than quite a few other cities in the county. So we have developed this as a way to kind of maintain those smaller camps while they're small. The outreach portion of this can take anywhere from a week to a couple of weeks. We work really closely with Volunteers of America. We meet with them at least once a week to talk about how everything is going in the camping locations that we've referred over to them. And basically, if they have got somebody that they have been working with that is really close to getting into some kind of resource. So they're really close to getting into detox, really close to getting into shelter, housing, etc. Then we'll let the camp be for another week. That's not to say that there aren't other mechanisms that then can come into play that would disrupt the camp, like if there was a need for the police department to go in and disrupt the camp because there was heavy criminal activity associated with it, that's kind of a different thing. But if, yeah, or the fire department too. If they're kind of staying small and clean and quiet and that person is very close to getting into a resource, then we'll wait on that site rehabilitation for another week and we'll talk about it the next week. If they are not getting any traction, which does happen with a camp that we've referred over to them, then they pretty much just send it back to us and say, okay, go ahead and schedule a cleanup. And that's what we do. We also have the rapid intervention team going to some hotspot locations where we know we don't necessarily get a ton of camping, or we get a lot of sort of intermittent camping, I would say. So places like Fairmont Park, the North Temple area between 8th and 9th West, Rio Grande Street, yeah. Places like that where you have people who, you have a lot of congregating, but you don't necessarily have a ton of camping. We use the rapid intervention team there to make sure that those places are getting kind of a deep clean or the good sort of attention that we need to both kind of help break up that congregation and to make sure that that congregation then doesn't tip over into camping. So yeah, those are kind of the nuts and bolts. Do you have anything?
No, that's good. The only thing I would say to Andrew's point, real quick, the only thing I would say to Andrew's point as well, Andrew mentioned that part of the reason we're doing this and the sort of thought process behind this model of keeping camps small was to keep them manageable and to make services more accessible. That's 100% true. What it also does that we're finding with utilizing this new model is it keeps violence down. The incidence of person-on-person violence and things like that within these smaller sort of communities, we're finding that that's a lot less, there are fewer occurrences, which also makes the job of the outreach workers a lot easier and a lot more attainable.
So it does look like we have a question. Amy, did you want to ask your question first?
I sure did. Thank you. Could you talk about how the communities that have some service from either the downtown or the few ballpark ambassadors that exist, how do they interface with your systems? For example, if I call the downtown ambassadors, do I simultaneously need to enter in an encampment on your app? And I ask partly because I don't always feel safe taking a photo of an encampment. I don't always feel like that's respectful. I also feel like sometimes folks see me doing that and they notice where I live. How do they interface with your lists?
Really good question. So the Downtown Ambassador Program, they operate in 4 different places.
I'm sorry, you're so echoey, I can't understand what you're saying.
Can everyone else hear me?
Now I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Sorry about that. So the Downtown Ambassador Program operates in 5 different neighborhoods. They operate in the Central Business District downtown. They're in the North Temple area, Rio Grande area, Ballpark, and Central City. What the ambassadors are is they are a great go-between, kind of between the, like, they're kind of a mid-step between an outreach worker and like a police officer. So they're very good at being able to respond in situations where maybe the police aren't the best option. I'm thinking particularly of like loitering. So if you place a call to the police department because you've got somebody who's loitering, it depends what their ability to respond to that would be, depends on the calls for service that they've already received that day. So it would be a low priority if they've got a lot of things that they're working on, or it would be a high priority if they don't have as many. With the ambassadors, they are really good at going in and helping to respond in those kinds of situations where, say, you've got somebody who is sitting in front of your business, who is being disruptive, something like that. If you call the ambassadors and you have the ambassadors respond that way, they will be able to do so much quicker than someone like a police department would. They do refer up to us different camp locations. They all have the app and they put information into the app for us. And that is definitely really helpful. I think that having the ambassadors are really kind of they're not really outreach workers. So they can't necessarily, they will make referrals over to services for people who are experiencing homelessness, but they don't have the same ability as an outreach worker to like get somebody into housing, for example. They are a really good kind of middle ground, I would say, there. If you have an active camp in your community, I would definitely suggest putting it in the app in whatever manner you feel comfortable doing. And Amy, that is a really good point about not feeling necessarily like it's the safest idea to be taking pictures or something like that. If we don't get pictures of an app or of a camp, what we will do is we will try to follow up with the reporter, so the person who reports in the app, and try to just get more information about it. So how big is it? Are there needles and bio-waste associated with it? Things like that. We'll try to do an evaluation that doesn't necessarily require you to take a picture, though pictures are definitely always helpful. The ambassadors likely probably know about that camp. If a citizen knows about it, the ambassadors probably do too. And they are working very closely with Volunteers of America to try to refer people over who have higher needs than they can resolve. Yeah, I would say, as far as the ambassadors are concerned, like having them take care of very sort of immediate issues is probably the best way to use that resource in your community.
Thanks, Michelle. Jan, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I have two. What is the end game? Is the end game one of acceptance that you're going to be with us, one of permissiveness, or is it one of elimination and sort of, permanent change? And the other question is, who makes up this population? And are we seeing people come more from out of state, or are they in-staters? Has anyone sat and broken down drugs, mental health, the truly homeless, those who don't want to work? I mean, there's a whole category. There are many categories. Does the city have a handle on who's in the population?
That is also a good question, Janet. Thank you. The statistics that we see from the state of Utah, we have a homeless management information system. It's a database that records everybody who is actively engaging with a service provider, with anybody in our service provider community. They enter information on people into that database. And the thing that we see most frequently, we do get this question quite a bit of like, are they shipping in people from out of town, that kind of thing. Overwhelmingly, the people who access services in Utah come from Utah, and particularly from Salt Lake County. So that data that we get, and that state data that's collected on the state level, that shows us that who we are dealing with are homegrown people. As far as kind of the different subcategories of people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, it is difficult. I will say it's a challenge when you go into, or when you're looking at an encampment, to know who is there because their friends are there, or who is there because they legitimately do not have another place to go, or who is there kind of trying to be a bad guy and to blend in with the crowd so that they can, do nefarious activities. Why we are taking the approach that we are is because we know in those larger camps, you get more of that negative activity. You don't get them quite as much. You can still get it in small camps, but you don't get it nearly as much in small camps as you do with large camps. Large camps, you get gang activity, you get drug activity, you get all kinds of people who are drawn into that area who aren't necessarily there because they don't have another place to go. They're there because they're, engaging in the other things that are associated often with large camps. So that's why we're taking the approach that we are, is we want to make sure that the camps that we get are small and that they're impermanent. We want to make sure that they are expected, that the expectation is very clear for people who are setting up a tent, that they are expected to take resources, that they're expected to go somewhere that is going to help them, as opposed to just living in a tent for the rest of their lives. That's not what we want to see, for sure. We want to make sure that everybody is able to access a resource that is going to help them get off of the streets, and that can be really challenging for a lot of people, for sure. There's definitely very legitimate barriers that exist for that. But also at the same time, we want to make sure that community expectation is set, that you do not live in a camp for the rest of your life. You go in to something that is going to get you off of the street.
Just quick follow-up. So the end game is not perpetuation of this. That's what I'm hearing from you.
No, certainly not.
In Portland and Seattle, 80% when they did their surveys were drug-related and mental health related. I'm just wondering if we have finite statistics. That's all I was asking. Has anyone really do they have a statistical profile of that community?
No, not necessarily. We do have statistics on people who have mental health issues and who have substance abuse issues within the broader homeless services community, and that comes from that homeless management information system. The statistics that I have seen is about a quarter of people who are in the homeless services system in general. So that could be if you're in shelter or if you're out of shelter. It's about a quarter of people who have a substance use issue, and it's about a quarter of people who have a mental health issue. I will say that's all self-reported data. So that comes to that information system from a caseworker going out, engaging with someone and asking them about the things that they're experiencing that have potentially caused them to become homeless in the first place. So self-reported data it can be challenging. It doesn't always give you the full story, for sure, but it's the best data that we have available to us, and that data tells us that it's about a quarter of people who are homeless. Any other questions we can field? We are more than happy to talk through anything with you all.
Dorothy, you had your hand raised.
Could you talk about how your experiences with dealing with these smaller camps and with this population relates to the proposals for these larger deeply discounted housing proposals that are out there now?
Yes, we can. Yes, absolutely. So you've probably all heard about Houston, right? Has everybody heard about the model that Houston is using now to try and address camps? They're kind of the gold standard right now. And this happens like within our field, that somebody will do something that's kind of a big breakthrough thing. And then everybody is like, oh, we need to like recreate this here. What we're doing is we're laying the groundwork for something very similar. We are in Houston. What they do is they go into a camp and they sit with that camp. And this is actually all provider led, which is kind of a different situation than what we have here. But outreach workers go into that camp and they identify a place for every single person to go out of that camp. They set a closure date for that camp and they say, everybody has to be in these places before this camp closes. What that does is it's really effective at resolving a camp. Andrew mentioned something about resolving camps. The best way to do that is to make sure that there are places for people to actually be when you close a camp down. They do that primarily through trying to house people out of those encampments because that's the most effective way to get people off of the streets. You can try to get people into shelters, you can try to get them into detox, but those are very impermanent situations. People can leave those situations really easily. When you have somebody in a housing unit of their own, they're going to try really hard to keep that unit. They're going to try really hard to do everything that they need to be successful to stay there because that is long term. And it is, it's what is going to, it has resolved their housing crisis essentially. And so Houston has been really effective at decreasing their street population because they've been trying to house people directly from the streets. With new housing units and new housing options that are coming online, what we want to do is we want to make sure that people who are living on the streets have access to those in a coordinated manner. So we have a lot of the groundwork laid to do something very similar, to kind of implement a very similar situation to what they have in Houston. But we don't have the units, we don't have the resources to actually get people from point A to point B into housing. These new units that are coming online, they open up a lot of potential for us to be able to do what we have wanted to do for quite some time, which is to actually resolve camps, is to actually get people off of the streets and get them into a place where they can be permanently. And so we're really excited about all these new resources that are hopefully potentially coming into our community. We're hoping for a big difference with those.
I think, Dorothy, you were referring to the state allocation of 55 million they announced on Friday. That'll go to a variety of immediate housing options and probably longer term housing options. And then this week, Wednesday, the Salt Lake City Mayor, Aaron Mendenhall, announced a proposal to the city council to do a grant to help hopefully speed up the creation of at least 400 units within the city or close by the city before the end of the winter overflow period this year. So we know winter overflow, the state's responsible to make sure that happens starting in October. And then come April every year that ends, we want to make sure we have some housing units created during the winter time so that there's not a big drop off in April as we've had in previous years.
So one of the things that would be helpful for me is if smaller camps are easier to work with unless there's, and they've kind of explained why that is, does that translate to these more permanent, permanent facilities where you have 150, deeply discounted units all in one spot, and then not too far away you have another very large group, and then you have other options where it's those units are much smaller percentage of the population. And that's the question I have is, do you know where I'm running with this, Andrew?
So, yeah, I think, Dorothy, there's a few, the largest one that got funded by the state was 197 proposed units. The smaller ones were below 60 and they were scattered, right? So I think it's going to take a mixture of things. I think when we talk about the Other Side Village tiny home concept, they're going to do 50 essentially units in their first phase, separated individually around common areas. The one that I think Ville was the one that got funded by the state. They're doing an old motel retrofit with a courtyard in the middle, but a lot of units. And then you'll see some other ones like Pamela's Place 2, which got funded, which is next door to the original Pamela's Place on 5th West. And it would be sort of that 5-story kind of deal you're talking about. So it's going to have to be a mixture of things, Dorothy. I think not everybody's going to fit in every one of them, but we're going to need a lot of units in a variety of ways to hit the needs of everybody we're seeing out there.
And you're talking about the Ramada Inn. The Ramada Inn was supposed to be slated for affordable housing, and they talked about students. And that's
Ville Properties, who's doing that, is a private developer. They applied to the state for their funds, and they did get some funding to do that larger 197 unit kind of model. It is the larger end of things. I think you'll see a lot of those. I think you'll see a lot more sort of to the 100 and lower than 100 kind of scale. And from the city end, permanent supportive housing generally has been sort of trying to do all one purpose in one place for the services component piece of it. But I think the city's goal within the RDA and other development options within the city is to have mixed income across the board, so that it is more scattered and people have more options to live not just in a permanent supportive housing large unit or large complex.
Thanks, Andrew. I think we have time for one last question. So Amy, you had your hand raised, and then we'll turn the time over to Rudy to talk about the housing plan he's working on.
Great, thank you. And I'm sorry, this question may already have been addressed in the press conference from Tuesday. I have a very busy day on Tuesday and Wednesday, and I haven't had time to watch the half-hour conference yet. Regarding the plans for winter overflow shelter, are the homeless resource centers going to be permanently flexed up to these new levels? Are the caps going to be permanently ignored? Is this going to be a flex that we're going to see every winter? This is the last thing in the operator agreement that hasn't been ignored. It's hard on the neighborhoods in which these were cited to see this go. Could we hear about what's going to happen in terms of the caps and what are the plans to actually make the resource centers accessible to this many more people? How are ADA accommodations going to be met? That sort of thing.
So I probably can't speak to the actual operators, VOA and the Road Home, who operate the 3. As far as ADA, from my knowledge of those buildings, they were built ADA compliant, including 2 elevators in each one. So if you had to access the second floor, you could. And I think the Geraldine on 7th actually was using the second floor throughout COVID to do more spacing. So they're pretty used to using multiple floors in that way. The state statute that allowed the state to override local conditional use permits, like the ones we have at the resource centers, was specific to winter overflow that exists only between October and April. So it is by definition temporary. Mayor Mendenhall has been clear that she does not support that, either temporarily or long-term. So she is not supporting that in any way to make it permanent.
It is by definition temporary in the sense that it will be temporary every year moving forward.
Well, the statute wasn't clear about year in, year out. It said this year, here's the process. The mayor's come up with a plan. If it's not sufficient, the state says it's not sufficient, then they would invoke some amount of preemption. It could be another facility somewhere else that houses everybody, or it could have been that with the flex up of the resource centers. The state notified the operators of the resource centers and shelter the homeless that they intended to invoke the flex for that 6-month period ending in April. From my discussions with other mayors and even the state, I think they found a lot of problems in that process that was laid forth. There's some good things to it. A lot of cities came to the table in a much more concrete fashion in the previous years. And ultimately, there was somebody who was responsible for this, which was the state at the end of the day, if things weren't going well. However, I think people all agree, from my discussions at least, that those resource centers were built and envisioned to have all the services needed for 200 people. In those
That is
two
correct. I'm glad that you agree with that.
And so that means you need the operational space for services and other entities to come in. A lot of needs need to be met there for that number of people. I can't say what'll happen next year if they're going to reopen that statute, Amy, at the state level legislature and change it in some ways. It's hard for me to sort of forecast, but right now the statute's pretty clear. This is not permanent. It's only for winter overflow for that time period.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Andrew, Michelle, and Joseph for coming today. And if there's any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And if you guys don't mind sticking around to answer them, that'd be great. But now we'll turn the time over to Rudy to talk about the Salt Lake City Housing Plan that he's working on.
Hi, thanks for having me today. As Jasmine mentioned, my name is Rudy Matthes. I'm with Salt Lake City's Department of Community and Neighborhoods, and we are in the process of working on an update to our 5-year housing plan. Our current plan, which is called Growing SLC, was adopted in 2018, and it's about to sunset. So we're trying to kind of do the immediate groundwork for laying a new plan. I'll just give a brief overview of the timeline that we're on, what we've done to date, and kind of the scope of the project, and then I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have. So because we need this new plan adopted before Growing SLC expires, we are looking for a March or April adoption date, which would mean that a draft of the plan would need to be completed for public comment by the beginning of 2023. And so what we're doing right now is doing the preliminary engagement where we haven't drafted a single word on a single page. We are going to the community. We're trying to find out what people want, what people need, and kind of putting a greater emphasis on people who are experiencing more housing insecurity. One of the things that Growing SLC did not include, which times were a little bit different, but there was no discussion really of the unhoused population. And so that's one of the things that we're also working on, is to kind of talk to all people, hear from all people, and really understand the need that exists in Salt Lake City and what we can do to address that over 5 years. Understanding 100% that we're not going to end homelessness or solve the housing crisis in 5 years, but we can certainly make really good efforts so that the next 5-year plan can get us farther down the road. Also understanding that we're one municipality in a state that is experiencing a housing crisis, and in a nation and in a world that's experiencing a housing crisis. So no matter what we do, there will be greater need than what the city itself can accomplish. But so we wanted to set those realistic expectations, but we also want to approach this in a way that is really going to make a difference. And so some of you may have already taken the survey, but there is a survey online that's been open since end of July or beginning of August. I think beginning of August sometime. To date, we have over 3,400 responses, which we feel is pretty good. And the demographics of those, while not perfectly aligned with kind of the demographics of the city, are quite good. They line up pretty well. And in addition to having an online survey, we've had paper-based surveys throughout the community for the past month, located at libraries, at community-based organizations, at homeless resource centers, and at service providers, and at some kind of transitional or permanent supportive housing locations as well, to just try to ensure that we're connecting with people who are less likely to take an online survey. Moving forward, we will be doing a bunch of focus groups. We're working with community organizations and community partners right now to help get those established. And so that will kind of take place in October. In addition, we'll have a bunch of students from a planning class helping to kind of spread the word and collect feedback. But one of the things that they'll be doing in October, and so you can, those of you who are on community councils can expect to have some students reaching out to you so that they can get some time on your October agendas to talk through a little bit about the housing plan, as well as ask a few questions, knowing 100% that they're not city employees, they're just students. They're doing it for coursework, but what they are gathering and what they're helping with will help inform the plan that we're putting together. I also want to just touch on the Thriving in Place effort that hopefully everybody is familiar with. That effort, which has been going on for the better part of 2022, is going to be something that rolls right into the housing plan. So all the recommendations that come out of that will be recommendations that go in the housing plan for the next 5 years. They'll have a specific focus. That section will have a specific focus on strategies to mitigate displacement pressure and help keep people housed. And then the housing plan more broadly will have kind of land use and other programs and funding sources and policies that we can implement to not only help people stay housed, but also to create more housing to meet the needs of the population. So that's kind of where we are. And what we've done, we've had a couple of events, and we'll continue to have some more events where we're tabling and getting feedback that way as well. But we are moving into a phase of the work that's trying to be deeper. So surveys are great at collecting broad information, and now we're really trying to get a little bit more specific and go a little bit deeper with the information that we're gathering to really ensure that we're meeting the needs of, like, as I mentioned earlier, the communities that are facing greater housing insecurity, as well as to help our community thrive in a way that that we would all like to see happen. So that's kind of where we're headed over the next couple months, and then in most of November we'll be analyzing the data that we've collected, and in December we'll be writing the plan, also reporting back to communities on kind of what we've heard, so that before anything goes for final public comment, people have a chance to weigh in and let us know if we need to course correct a little bit. So with that, happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Tom, you wanna?
Yeah, I'm wondering what the connection is between the housing plan and some of the proposals that have been floated out, such as the Affordable Housing Initiative and accessory dwelling units and so on. Is there a connection there? I would assume there is a connection, but those things are still proceeding through their own processes. So what's the connection?
Yeah, so because we don't have a new housing plan, anything that the city is currently working on is tied back to the current housing plan, which is growing SLC. And that has, broad goals and targets. And so all of the, over the past 5 years, that's been the guiding document on housing for the city. Over the next 5 years, the plan that we're developing will replace growing SLC and will be the new guiding document. And that will, likely include some strategies for land use policy, for instance. It will also likely include some, development of new funding mechanisms, or better using those funding mechanisms that currently exist to kind of really meet the need. So the idea is that a housing plan, anything that the city does on housing, should be able to tie back to the housing plan that's governing at the time. And so, as I mentioned, we're in the process of creating the new one, but that doesn't mean that the old one kind of stops working. And so, the affordable housing zoning incentive, the ADU ordinance, all those ordinances have a direct nexus to the current housing plan. And so that's the governing document for them. And, one of the things that we need to consider as we're thinking through a new housing plan is a really holistic approach. So, making sure that, and right now there's kind of nothing that's off the table. So we just want to make sure that we're casting a really wide net and trying everything that we can, and considering everything that we can in order to make sure that our city is more affordable and more livable for all people who want to live here.
Judy, I think that's your hand raised, right?
It is, yeah. I haven't found my hand on this app yet. Rudy, so pretend the accessory dwelling unit thing was passed by the Planning Commission last night. Pretend next month the city council approves it, and then the code is rewritten to be compliant with the new ADU plan. And then you get your plan approved, say next June. And there's stuff in there that's different. Does that mean the ADU ordinance would be rewritten again at that time?
Well, so no. It could, but it would have to go through a process to see kind of if it's working. And so the existing housing plan will take, or the new housing plan that we're writing will take into account various policies that are currently on the books if new things come online. I think the housing plan will be less specific, like we need an ADU ordinance change, like online X, Y, or Z. Like it'll be a little bit broader than that because it has to be a document that can address the issues over the next 5 years. There will be a specific implementation plan, but my idea is to have kind of more targets, right? So it'll be less focused on we need specific policy X, Y, and Z, and more on we want to see, goal A come to pass, whether that's, we want to increase the number of units in the city that are affordable to people making 50% AMI or lower. And that may be the goal. And we want to see that increase by X%. So then we'll take a step back and say, well, what are the tools that currently exist to get there? And what new tools do we have to make? So anything that's currently going through the process would be, if, supposing everything gets approved by the council, that would be the ordinance on the books. And that would, be a tool then that the city can use to address affordability moving forward. That doesn't mean that it's off the table to be relooked at over time, but that would kind of be the new standard, and it would be a new tool. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thanks.
Okay.
May I chip in on something here?
Oh, yep.
Hi, so on the ADU issue, and I'm sure all of us have, thoughts on this. As you probably know, the legislature limits our authority. And when I say our authority, is the city's authority to prevent ADUs or even houses from being Airbnbs type places. And we have, unfortunately, a very tight system. A very tight tool. So we cannot use the internet basically to find them and tell them that they are not permitted in a certain area or whatnot. So we in the city council are already looking at legislation change on that, and we're looking for people that could run those bills this next session to allow us to regulate this correctly. One of the main concerns I hear about ADUs is the temporary use of those that basically remove the house from the market, right? We have hotels in general for people to stay, and that is the best way. So stay tuned on that. I hope that if you feel like that is a good change, that that the city has more authority and the tools to actually enforce our code, that you contact the legislators, not only your legislator, and push for that bill to pass when the time comes. But it's going to happen soon in a few months. So I just wanted to add that into that conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, and Councilmember Pui, I just want to thank you for stepping in and saying that. I also just want to point out that this housing plan may have, if there are things that we hear from the public that require a code change at the state level, that's something that can guide the city's efforts over the next 5 years to try to do. So, the short-term rentals, specifically with ADUs or other short-term rental mechanisms may be one of the things that kind of comes out of this. And so, if there's things that we don't currently have in our toolkit that we hear that we need, or that the state preempts us on, that's something that, over the next 5 years we can work on. It doesn't guarantee that it'll happen because we have no control over the state, but it's something that we can put effort towards. But it'll be a guiding document for housing for the next 5 years.
It's a big job.
It's a fun job.
Yeah.
Great.
Let me just-
Well, oh, go
let me
ahead,
say
Judy.
one thing. I put the name of the woman from the League of Women Voters who's in charge of voter registration in the chat. Let's see, it's somewhere, it's up towards the top, I think. Helen Moser, if you want to write that down, if you're going to have some kind of an event, doesn't have to be a debate, but any kind of an activity where a bunch of people are gathering and you think people might need to be registered, talk to Helen.
Great. Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Rudy, too. And I see you already put an email if people have comments that they'd like to make. So thank you. We're at the end of our time. So we will see you guys all next month on the 20th. Oh, Jen, did you have something before we go? Oh, no, just waving goodbye. Okay. Well, have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.